Good afternoon, Rio Grande third grader Eagles. It's so good to see you, and I'm glad that you've come to check your answers for our week 7 day 1 DMA. Remember, as you're self-checking yourself, to also put a star or happy face next to the ones that you got correct. If you happen to not get it correct, then please correct yourself using maybe a pen or maybe a light highlighter marker. These will continue to help you improve on your skills as we continue through our third grade year. So let's get started. Wendy has to go to the movies at the time shown on the clock. What time does Wendy have to go to the movies? So remember that when we're going to tell time, and this is our third grade standard for telling time to the minute, we are going to look at our hour hand first, which is the shorthand, and you will notice that the hour hand is in between the 7 and the 8 hour numbers on our clock. So as the minute hand continues to go around our clock, you will notice that this hour hand continues to get closer and closer to the next hour. So it's not quite 8 o'clock, but it is 7 o'clock. We are also, after that, going to take a look at the minute hand, which tells us our minutes. You will notice that now we are looking at the minute hand and seeing that this minute hand is now in between these 5-minute interval marks. So just a reminder, remember that from each number on our clock to the next is a 5-minute increase. So if you remember, at the 1, if the minute hand is pointing at the 1, that's 5 minutes. If it's pointing at the 2, that's 10 minutes. If the minute hand points to the 3, that's 15 minutes. And if it's pointing at the 4, that would be 20. And continue 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, and then the next hour, which is o'clock. Now, you will notice here that we're in between the 15 and the 20-minute mark. So since there aren't any minute marks on your paper, I've kind of demonstrated here on my own what the minute marks might look like if you had them on your paper. So if you'll notice, you could estimate that this would be between 16, 17, somewhere along there. So if you put 7:16 or 7:17, somewhere in there, that would be a good estimate of telling time for that particular clock shown. Now, could we put AM or PM? Well, we could put PM, since most of the time you really don't have movie theaters open this early in the morning. Not to say that some don't, but for most movie theaters, we might say that this could be a PM or evening time. So, looking at our next problem, we're looking at base 10 blocks. Remember, our base 10 system tells us that we need at least 10 of one place value to regroup it and create another 10 or 100 based on the next place value. So, for example, right here, I can tell that this is 9. If I had one more 1 here, I would be able to take these 10 ones and regroup it as a 10. If I had 10 tens, I could regroup it as 100. And if I had 10 hundreds, I could regroup it as 1,000. So let's take a look at this number. We have 2 hundreds, so that tells me my 2-digit is going to be in my hundreds place. I have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, so that's 5 tens. So I'm going to put the digit 5 in my tens place, and I have 9 ones, and that would tell me my 9 goes in my ones place. I have 9 ones. Now, if I were going to use this number and write it and just kind of let's review what expanded form is, I would take each digit and write it as its own number using addition and its value. So the 2 has a value of 200. The 5 has a value of 50, which we see here in our base 10 blocks. And the 9 has a value of 9 in our ones place. So that's expanded form. If we were to write it out as words, we would write 259 in word form. If we were going to round this to the nearest 10, we could say that we know that this would round to about 260 because it's 1 away from 260 rounded to the nearest 10. Let's take a look at our next set of equations. We have a subtraction equation here. We're subtracting 10 from 50. So if we subtract 10 from 50, we really don't need to go through all the place values to determine how to subtract 10 because we're not even subtracting any ones. We're just subtracting a 10 from this tens place. So 450 minus a 10 would be 440. That's basically one of our second grade standards, which was you should be able to add or subtract 10 to any number. Here we're going to add 100 to this hundreds place here. So if we're adding one more 100 to 600, that would be 711. And if we were going to add a 10 to this 20 in our tens place, one more 10 after 20 would be 30. So we would have 331. Taking a look at our next subtraction problem, we have a total of 677, and from this we are going to subtract part. And we want to know what's our missing part or what's left over. So we can use a few different strategies here. We could take the 677, subtract 200. That would leave us with, subtract 200s from here, we would have 477. We could take that 477, subtract the tens, since we've already subtracted our hundreds, we could subtract our tens. And when we're subtracting our tens, we know that there's only 7 tens here, which is 70. But we're not subtracting just 70, we're subtracting 80. So that tells us that if we subtract this 10, or excuse me, that 70, that would leave us with 407. And if we subtract another 10, that would leave us with 397. We take the 397 and we subtract 8 from this 8 here in 288. We know that we have 7 that we can subtract, and we need to subtract one more after that. So if I subtract 7 from 397, that's 390, and then subtract one more, that would be leave us with 89. So just a way of thinking about taking apart numbers and using them flexibly. Another way that we could use this is we could take our 677, subtract it by our place values. We know that 600 minus 200 is 400. We know that 70 minus 80 cannot be done, which tells us that we need to regroup or borrow 100. Why do we need to borrow? Because in order for us to subtract 80 from this 70, we need to have enough to subtract. So we're going to borrow 100 from here, leaving us with 300s. And I'm going to regroup that here in my hundreds place. So basically what I'm doing is I'm taking 100 from here and regrouping it there. And now I'm going to go ahead and subtract. Now, if you know anything about, if you know anything about 80, it's 70 and 10. And we can subtract this 70 right here, which would leave us with 100, and then subtract one more 10, which would leave us with 90. Now, to check our subtraction, we can add 90 plus 80, and 90 plus 80 should give us 170. And that's how you can check your subtraction, is by using addition, going backwards. Now, some of you might say, oh, well, if I said 70 minus 80 is 10, which is what some people are doing, if I use addition to check my subtraction, is 10 plus 80 going to give me 70? No. So please remember, if you want to be accurate, use some addition to check your subtraction. So in this case, we know that we would not be able to do that. So I can say that 170 minus 80 is 90. And if I subtract 7 minus 8, could it be 1? Not if I'm checking my subtraction using addition. So is 1 plus 8 going to be 7? No. So that tells us that we are not able to subtract 7 minus 8, since we cannot check using addition. So that tells us we need to borrow a 10 from here, regroup it into our tens place, or ones place, from here. So we're borrowing and regrouping it there into our tens, from our tens to our ones, and we have 9, and 9 plus 8 is 17 when we check using addition. So now we can take the 300, the 80, and the 9 and put it back together from standard form, or expanded form to standard form, and that gives us our 389. Now I just kind of want to talk about this as an algorithm. When we line up our place values, same idea. We cannot subtract. We know we could not subtract from here. So we borrowed a 10. Here we're borrowing it from our 70, which is possible as long as we have enough to borrow and subtract. That leaves us with 60. We regroup that 10 into the tens place. Now we have 17. Now we can subtract. 17 minus 8 is 9. I can double check and make sure 9 plus 8 is 17. I don't have enough tens. I have 6 tens. Cannot subtract 8 tens, or 80. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to borrow or regroup 100, which is what I did from here to here, except now I'm just doing it from here to here. And now I'm going to have 16 tens, which is 160, which here, that's 170. 16 minus 8 tens, 16 tens minus 8 tens is 8 tens, which is 80. And 500s minus 200s is 300s. 389, which is exactly what we ended up with when we subtracted here, here, and using our algorithm. So just some different strategies and helping us think flexibly about numbers, and hopefully we'll continue to improve on these different strategies as we continue adding and subtracting through our up to 1,000. So have a great afternoon, and we will see you tomorrow for DMA Week 7, Day 2.